Coming to you from the Deep South, this is the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast. High impact leadership is not reserved for leaders, and it has nothing to do with your position, title, or rank. However, it does have everything to do with your character. It's time to climb to the next level and beyond, personally and professionally. Now, let's start making it happen with your host, Mac Story.
Hello and welcome to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast. And thanks for listening. Today you're listening to one of 15 episodes that I recorded with my wife, Rhea Story. So you'll be hearing both of us speak together. And we're speaking to you about a book that we actually wrote together called Change Happens, Leading Yourself and Others Through Change. And it's based on a lot of principles that we learned along the way. And we'll share some personal stories, some things that are not in the book. But as you listen to this, if you enjoy listening to Rhea, and I'm pretty sure you will, make sure you check out her podcast, which you can find on your favorite app by searching for her name, Rhea, R-I-A, Story, S-T-O-R-Y. And also, she's all over LinkedIn. She puts out a lot of content. She's got a lot of books on leadership development and personal growth. So be sure to check out Rhea. I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to part 12 of our series that Mac and I are doing on our book, Change Happens, Leading Yourself and Others Through Change. And today, this episode is all about communicating change. And to me, this is one of my favorite sections to talk about when we talk about when change happens, because I've been in situations, I've been in companies where changes were happening and no one communicated the changes. So I know what that feels like when change is happening, major changes I'm talking about. And yet the leadership in the organization wasn't communicating the change, and it just leaves everyone in the dark. And when that happens, trust goes down, morale goes down, frustration goes up, productivity goes down. It's a bad feeling. It creates a lot of bad feelings, a lot of negative feelings in the organization. And I've been on the other side too. So I can remember, it's been obviously quite a few years ago, Mac, when I'd made the decision to leave my job working at a hospital and step full time into writing and speaking and that kind of thing. And I remember it was a tough decision to make because I really enjoyed what I was doing, and the organization was a good organization. It just wasn't my passion. It wasn't really my calling. And so I'd made that decision to step away from that role. And I sat down and had that conversation with my boss at the time. And the first thing she said was, well, I need to talk to so and so, and I need to talk to so and so, and I need to make a transition plan and all of that. And I said, well, you know what? The next thing that I need to do is I need to go tell my team, because this is going to be a huge change for them. This is going to impact them the most, right? And they don't need to hear about this change from somebody else. They need to hear that from me. I need to communicate this with them. And she said, well, you don't know what to tell them. You don't know what's going to happen. And I said, that doesn't matter. What's important is I need to tell them this is what I know at the time. And I need to be really clear through this transition of communicating, hey, even if I don't have all of the answers, here's what I know. I'm not going to keep them in the dark and let them guess or second guess, because it's already disruptive to them. There's going to be some major changes, as I step out and they have a new director. But how we handle this transition is going to significantly impact them and their productivity and the work they're doing. But more than that, it's going to affect them personally too. And we want to give them the best chance to set them up for success as the next leader comes into this division. So hopefully I was able to, for me, that really was important because I'd been on the other side of it so many times where my leaders didn't communicate changes to me. And that's frustrating. And so I knew the number one thing I had to do with them is just be clear of just saying, hey, here's what I know now. And I gave a 4-month notice. So there was a lot of time for the transition. But as things were happening and we were moving offices, and I would go to them and I would just say, hey, here's what I know right now. Here's what I know right now. And if I can do nothing else, hopefully I can make this change a little easier by communicating it well.
It's kind of sad. That was a good story, Rhea, but it's kind of sad that the opposite of what you just described is the norm.
It is.
I
It
mean,
is.
a lot of people, a lot of times they don't ever hear it from their leader. You know, the leader lets it just get out some kind of way, and by the time it's out, everybody knows it's out, and the leader never even communicates the change. And I would say, and you touched on these points. I'm just going to twist them up a little bit different and say it different, but if you want to create distrust, keep people in the dark. If you want to build trust, keep people in the know. And even though you were leaving, which could create some distrust, you actually leveraged that change to create more trust with your team as you were going out the door. First of all, you went straight to them. You told them, I may not know it all. I don't know it all. What's going to happen? This is what I do know. That built trust. Then you, on top of that, gave a 4-month notice. That built trust with your team, even with the leaders. You built trust. I always tell people, when you quit an organization, when you quit, don't quit just because you're quitting. What I mean is, don't stop being a high impact person because you're going to walk out the door. You were a high impact person while you were there. You were a high impact person even after you told them you were leaving. You probably even picked it up a level. I wasn't there with you, but I can imagine that over those last 4 months, you actually kicked it into even higher gear and built more trust on the way out the door.
Yeah, that certainly was my intent. And there again, that's a big change, but that's an opportunity to, like you say, to build trust. And I still have team members who were following me then, and they're still following me. Still able to mentor some of those team members. And that means a lot, because that says a lot about the trust that I was able to help create, is keeping that communication going. But you're right, it's unfortunate, but that usually is not the norm. I remember back when I used to teach group fitness, I remember hearing from a member, right? Like, I was working in the facility as an instructor, and I remember hearing from a member that the company was being sold and that we had a new owner. And I was like, how do the members know? And the people that work there were so in the dark that they had no clue. And in fact, we didn't get any formal notification until the day the sale actually occurred. And it was just shocking to me that there are people who don't communicate change for whatever reason. Maybe they are poor leaders, or not secure leaders, and they don't want to deal with questions, or they don't want to deal with concerns. But that really just, it doesn't increase their influence, and it really just creates more problems, because the grapevine starts ticking. People are talking, speculating, gossiping, and it just compounds it.
And I just say, to support what you were saying, I know why they don't do it. They don't do it because they don't want to lead change. They're trying to manage change. And in their management mind, in their manager's mind, they're trying to manage the people. They're trying to manage the process. And good or bad, whatever it is they're doing, they're not leading the change, without a doubt. They are 100% trying to manage that change and trying to control everything. And that's a management tactic when it comes to people. When you're trying to control the people, that's management of people, not leadership of people. And you touched on a lot of the things related to management. They don't, a lot of times, managers of people, they don't want to communicate the changes coming or what it might be, because they don't want all the feedback. They just gonna wait to the last minute and take only what they have to deal with. And that's poor leadership. Maybe high impact managers, but they're poor leaders.
Yeah. So, one of the things we talk about in the book is being open and transparent in your communication builds trust, while hoarding information about what's going on creates distrust. And that's a good example of that. when change is happening, it's important to be transparent, communicate the changes with the right people at the right time. But that always helps increase trust. Again, even if you don't have all the answers or don't know where things are quite going, let them know, right? It's okay as a leader to say, hey, I don't have all of the answers, but we are going to figure this out as a team. And people will trust you far more if you say that, rather than if you pretend to know the answers and don't share them, or don't know the answers and pretend to have the answers, right? Most of the time people are going to pick up on that too. So yeah, incredibly important to communicate changes. And these days, with all of the technology that is available to us, there's no excuse not to communicate with people. I mean, you might not work in the same state as they do, but you can jump on a Zoom call these days and almost have a face-to-face conversation. Not quite as good, but there's really no excuse to not be able to communicate with people.
Yeah, transparency is the key. Anyone following a leader can say, do I want to follow a transparent leader or someone who's trying to hide things from me? That's
Mm,
the only thing you know. And that's
yeah.
how you break it down. It's obvious which leader you'd want to follow, a transparent leader. But which person are you? And if you can't be transparent, it's usually what's causing you not to be able to be transparent are a lot of other underlying character issues that the person would need to work on. That's why
Mm.
everything we teach about leadership and personal growth, it's all about character development. There's only it's a character flaw that would prevent someone from being transparent.
Yeah, so the greater the change, the greater the need for communication. And I can see this again in so many examples in different companies and different organizations where, it might be a minor change. We're changing the security code on the door. Well, that could be a pretty major change if you don't tell the right people. But something like that's pretty fairly insignificant, hopefully. But if you're changing computer software systems, that could be a huge change, right? So the more information you can give people about what's coming, and number one, it's going to be easier to prepare them because they'll have more time to get ready for it, more time to be prepared. But it's also going to make that so much easier because they're going to know that when change is happening, they can depend on you to tell them. I can remember one organization where there was a lot of changes financially going on, and the leadership was very thorough and just having a lot of meetings and talking about these and what's going on and what's happening and all of this different stuff. But that increases trust, right? Especially when it comes to money, people can be very uncomfortable and it's scary, right? If there's a lot of financial instability in an organization, people need to know that because they will trust you more if you're upfront about that than rather than if you try to cover up that there are problems.
Yeah, and a lot of talking about lean manufacturing and lean companies again, and that's probably where I'm always going to go to when I talk about change, because that's what lean is about: changing, continuous improvement, improving the processes, all the processes. But traditional companies, they don't typically share their financials, not a lot of them. And when you really truly get into a true lean company, they have to be a true lean company, you got to have high impact leaders with high impact character, and you got to value the people. You got to trust the people. They got to trust you. There are not many companies like that. Those that are, they share all the financials, everything about profit. There's nothing hidden about it, because if you want to engage the people have to know what's going on. They're not going to be engaged if they don't buy in to the leaders.
Yeah, I remember one book I think you shared with me. Maverick was the name of it, and
Oh yeah.
it's talking about that organization. I believe it was in Brazil. Correct me if I'm wrong. But they are so transparent in their organization. They're very unique, but their people actually choose their own salaries. However, the caveat is that everybody knows what everybody is making. And so that's an interesting perspective on transparency because I don't know of any other organization I've ever heard about where everyone knows exactly what everyone else's salary is.
It's one of those things that managers of people want to hide.
Hmm.
High impact
Hmm.
leaders of people wouldn't want to hide it. everybody would know what everybody makes, and they'd understand why people make different salaries, and they'd understand what's it take to get that salary and to get in that position. If everything's open, I mean, there's nothing to hide. Anyone doing that doesn't have anything to hide. The moment we're literally hiding something, there's a reason. Because if there's no reason to hide something, you don't hide it. so as soon as why something being hidden, you don't know the reason, you're losing trust automatic. Talk about your definition in your book, Straight Talk: The Power of Effective Communication. And we're talking about communicating change, and we're talking about transparency. But I remember reading in there, you have a great definition of transparency.
So I like to say that transparency is the purest form of telling the truth.
That's really good stuff, Rhea. I remember when I read it, I thought, is that true? Why is that true? You know, that's what good stuff is, thought provoking, and that's what your definition of transparency made me think. It made me stop and think as I was editing your book for you when you actually first wrote it. And I remember thinking to myself, why is it true? And then I decided that transparency is the purest form of telling the truth, because we're transparent. Well, being transparent means we're telling the truth when we don't have to, simply because we want to. To me, that's what transparency is about. You know, we share a lot of things that people never ask us. They don't even know to ask us, but we're being transparent because someone who's sharing the truth when they don't have to, simply because they want to, builds trust with people, especially when it's something negative or not good about your past. You and I share a lot about our mistakes and the dumb things, especially dumb for me. You didn't do that many dumb things, but I did a lot of dumb things. But you've went through some stuff, and when you can be transparent, people trust you more. I mean, it's common sense. People are going to trust somebody who's open compared to somebody who's closed, because you don't know why they're closed. You have to guess, and your guess may or may not be right, but you're telling yourself a story about why people hide stuff. And that's why leaders who hide stuff have a team of people telling themselves stories every day about why they're hiding this stuff. Why didn't they tell me? I mean, people are coming up. You know, the grapevine, the rumor mill, it's out there. It's alive and well. The more stuff being hidden, the more stories people are telling themselves, and then they become to believe it, whether it's true or not.
Yeah, you know, our mind is, and you've probably seen some of those memes where maybe there's a word missing in a sentence, but our mind as a person is really great at completing gaps. You know, you can see 3/4 of a picture, or you remember those old school connect the dots, but you know, if you did a few of them, you could kind of just look at the dots and imagine in your brain what the final picture would be if you connected all the dots. You could say, oh, well, it's a heart shape or a star or a picture of a person. Because our mind it gets really good as we grow. We learn to fill in the gaps and fill in the blanks, and then there might be a word missing in a sentence, but your mind just fills it in and you don't even think about it. It just processes it as though it were there. Now that's a really useful skill if you're reading, for example, or you're putting a puzzle together and you're trying to figure out which piece goes where. But it can work against us as people, because we get one piece of information that is a fact, and our mind starts to try to paint the picture and complete the story for us. But a lot of times that's based on just the story we tell ourselves and not actual fact, right? We have one piece of knowledge and three things that we make up in our head to justify this piece of knowledge, and we end up with a completely wrong picture. And you know, the problem with that is a lot of times we're responding to the story we're telling ourselves, and we're reacting to that story which is not even true and not even based on fact, and that creates all kind of problems in relationships or problems in organizations. Even worse, we have one piece of information and three things that we tell ourselves about that, and then we share those three things with somebody else as though they are true, and that's how rumors get started.
Pretty sad, isn't it, Rhea?
It's just a fact that we as people tend to paint the rest of the picture for ourselves, and then it's all too easy for that to become our reality and maybe somebody else's.
It's one of them reasons when I'm leading change and people are telling me all these reasons things are happening, or the reason this is the way that is, or you know, all these what I call people's opinions, although they call them facts a lot of times. One reason I always ask them, do you know or do you think you know?
I hate when you ask me that.
I ask a lot
Because
of,
then I have to go back and second guess. I'm like, do I really know this? I mean, it's a great question, but it forces me to go back and think, well, this is why I think this, but do I really think this, or is it true? Is it just something some conclusion I've created?
and the reason I always ask it, because especially leading lean, I'm leading the change. I'm making decisions. I'm trying to influence people and influence things to happen. And I needed to know, because I when I was there, I was responsible. So when people telling me stuff, thinking they were right, or thinking that they were telling the truth, or that they actually knew, wasn't good enough. I had to know. I needed to know. So I would always ask, do you know, or do you think you know? And I could tell pretty quick by their answer if they actually had a chance of knowing, because if they truly knew, or truly thought they knew, they could back it up pretty quick. But if they had to start thinking and stumbling around and all that, no matter what they tell me, I ain't 100% sure if they know. We're going to have to go look. We're going to have to go to the source, the Gemba, as it's called in lean, where the work actually happens. And we're going to have to go find out. People didn't like that. They wanted to go fast. They wanted to stay in the office and talk about stuff instead of go actually learn what's really going on and do something about reality on the ground. So when we
Mm,
talk about communicating change, Peter Drucker says this: the most important thing in communication is to hear what isn't being said. And, when I led those teams, one of the things I'd often ask on Monday morning, once I started asking it, I always asked it, but I didn't ask it in the beginning because I wasn't so good about communicating change. I was growing and learning. And one thing I'd always ask the people, though, were, what were you thinking about this? What were you thinking last week about this week? And what I was trying to do was actually what Peter Drucker was talking about. The most important thing in communication is to hear what isn't being said. So by asking that question, they were not going to come in and tell me what they were thinking about last week. But knowing what they were thinking about last week was important to me because it told me about their mindset relative to change. And so when I asked them, I was actually getting them to share that. So I got a story. Uh, One of the most powerful ways to get buy-in is to ensure others feel understood before you try to be understood. So you let other people go first. And I didn't always do that when I started leading lean, leading change, and process improvement. But once I discovered that, one of the things that I would do is I would start out seeking first to understand the people. That's one reason I asked that question and other questions. But I remember one event I was doing where I was leading basically all the top leaders of this facility. And this particular event, I didn't do many events like this, but this one was really to develop a plan. Most of my event was to come up with a plan and execute the plan, and then validate the new changes, all that during 1 week. That's what I typically did. But this one was actually a come up with a plan, come up with some ideas kind of thing. So I had basically 10 or 12 of the top leaders at this facility in the room. And my goal was to lead them through a discussion and get them to come up with some new ideas on how to improve a problem that had been a problem for a long time. They had already tried to tackle it a lot of times. And so I was going to apply, seek first to understand, then be understood. So I always did that once I learned that principle. But it took me 2.5 days, Rhea, from Monday to middle of the day on Wednesday, before everyone in the room felt understood. See, I was leading that team of 10 or 12 people. Before we could move forward, I had to get everyone in the room to apply the same principle that I was trying to apply. And they didn't want to apply it bad as I did. All of those people just wanted to be understood. So nobody was listening very well. So it was a lot of finger pointing, and they were blaming each other, and it was not a good situation. A lot of time they were dropping F-bombs on each other and F-bombs on me. And, I'm sitting at the end of the table, drinking a soda. And whenever they'd get quiet, I'd ask another question because they were just kind of going at it. But what happened was they finally felt understood middle of the day Wednesday. And how I knew that was it got quiet. There was no more blaming, nobody raising their voice. Once it kind of got silent and I asked a few questions and there was nothing else to add, I realized they all felt understood. That's why they were quiet. So now it was my turn to try to be understood. The problem was is they haven't come up with any single thing to improve the process yet, middle of the day on Wednesday. And so now that they were quiet, I could actually ask, what can we do? We've talked about it for 2.5 days. What can we do? And then they looked at me like I was crazy. Hadn't you been in here the last 2.5 days? There's nothing we can do. We've talked about it. We've already tried it several times, literally over the years. Nothing we can do. So I told the person who was operating the computer, hey, pull up our final presentation. We normally did that on Friday, but we're going to do it on Wednesday afternoon today instead of Friday afternoon. And I said, just pull up the presentation. I said, just type in there. There's nothing we can do. And I said, what time do y'all want to hold the final presentation? You know, for like the owner of the company and maybe some executives that were not in the room with us. I said, what time you want to do the final presentation? And tell those people after 2.5 days, there's nothing you can do. Because I was prepared to do that. I said, I go on back home. There's no reason for me to be here. If you guys can't do anything, no reason for me to be here. They said, well, we can't tell them that. I said, okay, what can we do? And then that sparked the conversation where they actually started coming up with options. And by the end of the week on Friday, we actually had a great presentation, and they had come up with a lot of ideas. The reason I share that story is because the principle, seek first to understand, then be understood. If I'm going to lead others through change, I need to understand them first, because I couldn't lead them. What I did on the middle of the day on Wednesday, I could not do on Monday because they did not want to listen to me. They already knew they were in there to make improvements. They didn't need me to tell them that. All they needed me to do was to lead them. And I had to lead them through everyone understanding each other first, because until they understood each other and felt understood is the key part, they had to each feel understood. I couldn't get them to be quiet about all the moaning, groaning, and blaming so that we could move forward with the actual project, coming up with a better way of doing things. There was too much stuff in the air. And a lot of consultants would have went in and tried to force it, tried to manage the people right off the bat. They wouldn't have applied this principle, and they wouldn't have got any results that week.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just such a powerful part of communication is listening first. Kevin Cashman said this. He said, authentic listening is not easy. We hear the words, but rarely do we slow down to listen and squint with our ears to hear the emotions, fears, and underlying concerns, right? We're listening to hear what's not being said. What are the concerns there? What are the emotions? And we know when change is happening, there's a lot of that goes on. And as leaders, if we are open about communication, not just communicating what we have to say, but also listening first and understanding, I think that's very powerful. Any final thoughts as we wrap up this episode?
I'd just like to talk about, again, managing change versus leading change. Leaders know none of us is as smart as all of us. Managers think I'm the smartest one in the room. That's why I'm the manager. I'm the boss. Leaders also know that none of us is as creative as all of us. Managers of people think I'm the most creative. That's how I got this job. Also, leaders think none of us is as experienced as all of us. And again, managers of people tend to think I'm the most experienced. I've got the most experience. That may or may not be true, but that manager does not have the most experience of everybody in the room added together. And what I'm talking about is managing versus leading. Managers don't value the input of others very much unless they have to have it to make a decision. Leaders of people value the input of others tremendously because they want to make the best decision, not the decision. So leaders of people, when they're communicating change, they're putting all the change, they're communicating to all the people so they can get all this feedback, not just to make a decision, but to make a better decision based on all of the people's visibility. Because a lot of times people who are not even communicated to about the change know the most about the impact the change is going to have. So we're going to wrap this one up, but the next episode, we're going to talk about initiating change, really leading change. That's when you're really leading it. It's when you're initiating it. You're the one starting it from scratch. So hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Talk to you next time.
Yep.
Make it happen or someone else will. It might as well be you. Are you serious about taking your career and your life to the next level and beyond? Check out Mac Story's Blue Collar Leadership series books and others, now available on audio, along with paperback and ebooks at Amazon, iTunes, and Audible. Please visit bluecollarleadership.com to learn about Mac's books, programs, special offers, certifications, and more. Thank you for listening to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast.